Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Qigong Radio. This is Dan Kleiman, and my guest again on Qigong Radio today is Energy Arts Senior Instructor Paul Cavell. Now, from time to time, Paul and I talk. It's not that we call each other to talk about our problematic students, although as you listen to this, that might be what you think happened here. But we're actually... He reached out to me with some ideas that he's been thinking about lately in his teaching, and it lined up exactly with something I've been struggling with lately in the classroom. And so we thought it was a pretty good idea to talk it through here and, see what comes out. So, Paul, let me explain why I started to get really nervous about my teaching, and I'm hoping that you can reassure me here.
Okay, sure.
I've just been reading someone's research, and they haven't published anything yet, but they're talking about this process they're undergoing, training horses. And she's been hiring expert horse trainers and watching what they do, and she came across something interesting. She's been filming them. And then she films them, and then she says, okay, this time when I film you, I want you to explain to me what you're doing as you're doing it. And then together, they review the tape after, and they both notice that when they're explaining and doing at the same time, performance completely falls apart. Their skills drop. And
interesting.
Yeah, and even they did it a third time, and she said, okay, don't explain while you're doing it, just do it. But afterwards, after we shoot the film, go ahead and you'll have to break down and explain what you did and dissect it. And even there, not only was there a big mismatch between what the trainers were doing and what they said they were doing, so they, first of all, didn't even know how to articulate what they were doing, but when they were tasked with that, even in the future, to say you're going to have to analyze and explain your performance, the performance still suffered. And I read that. Yeah, I read that and I thought, oh my God, now I have no idea how to step into the classroom and teach anymore because as soon as I start to explain what I'm doing, it's going to fall apart. And then I started thinking, and this is where I think this ties into what you've been thinking about, I started flipping that over and saying, well, as a student, if I try to get to know the material and I process it through concepts and through information, what she's essentially saying is there's a huge gulf between your ability to do and your ability to know and get information. So I'm worried now about bridging that gap, not only in my own practice, but as a teacher. And yeah, I don't know. And I think this lines up with what you talk about in terms of the perception that there are these like secrets or shortcuts to learning these practices. So help me out here. I'm stuck in this gulf between explaining and doing and knowing and how we get at something, as you said in the past, as multi-layered and multi-dimensional as Neigong practice.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues that I see is when people understand that, there's these 16 layers to getting from here to here, then they're trying to get to the destination. And in trying to get to the destination, they're using each step in the process as a stepping stone to get there. Mm-hmm. And this doesn't allow somebody to really focus on what is required to solidify before you can move on to the next level of training. So in knowing everything about the internal arts, because now, of course, there's so many books and DVDs and online courses and God knows what out there, and training programs galore, and all the information, if you like, is circulated, and everybody knows about it intellectually. And so that in itself creates a blockage to actually physically embody it Because to physically embody something, you have to ignore everything else except for that one piece that you're trying to focus on. But if the mind is swinging from tree to tree, as we say, then you don't know where you're at and what you're meant to be doing in the moment. It's also similar to if you're doing your practice and all you can think about is your shopping list when you go off to the supermarket next, then that's not a quality practice. You're not really embodying the material at that moment in time. Your mind's off somewhere else.
See, everybody. Yeah, I mean, I get that. Like, I think most people understand that first layer of distraction was like, okay, I've got to be present in class is a problem that you'll get over when you start to get into the practice. But what you just said sounds like a much more serious problem to me because your mental model for your training may actually be getting in your way.
Yeah, I believe it is. I'm seeing this more and more and more. For instance, a number of things I can bring up here. If I'm teaching bend and stretch, people start asking about open and close. Mm-hmm. If I start teaching the spinal ligaments, people say, yeah, but when do you pump the spine? Whatever level of the training you're trying to present to people, people already know what the next 2-3 stages are, and they're asking questions on those 2-3 stages, and they're not focusing on what they're supposed to be learning in that particular class. So when you get to the next stage, they haven't solidified the previous stage, so it won't come alive in the body. Now, I personally was very lucky when I started training because there wasn't much available. It was really limited, and the material that was out there was really Shaolin based. It wasn't internal, so it didn't grab me. And so when I found some real deep internal work and I got access to it, you didn't know what the next 3, 4, 5 stages were. That's your whole world. That was it. That's all you knew about that about internal exercise. Yeah. So we would spend a long time practicing that nugget, whatever that nugget was. And for instance, I think I trained energy gates for 7 years. And that was my Qigong for 7 years. And I did learn a bit of other Qigongs around it, but that was my one thing. And I think it took us 3 years before we got to the third swing. So when we got to the third swing, the first and second swings were really down. So the third swing came alive. And as you know, you teach someone the third swing too early, and it basically falls to pieces. So they can't attain it.
But okay, I'm trying to understand this problem, because what you're describing, the way you were trained and you came up, that was really kind of the old school method. And for a lot of people, for the folks who learn that way, you weren't allowed to ask your teacher questions about what's next and what's the information. They just wouldn't entertain that.
They wouldn't even let you know it existed.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't even ask the question because to you it didn't exist.
And see, when I talk to, so in the States, and I don't know if it was like this for you, but when I talked to a lot of people that knew Bruce in the 70s and 80s and studied with him then, they said when he came back from China, he started explaining, giving the basically the context for a lot of what people were learning. And in that case, it sounded like, oh, nobody was talking about the qua, nobody was talking about basic alignments. The lack of information and what he was bringing to light sounded really helpful because people were getting hurt and people weren't getting the full training. And it was written off as like, well, these traditional teachers just don't tell you very much and you have to go practice. So there it looks to me like there's a place where the information, a certain amount of information is really helpful.
Absolutely. Well, you've got to know what you're doing.
What?
When you mentioned the qua and the alignments, I mean, without qua and alignments, what do you have? You have a very strange movement. So
what do you say to your students?
We're not discussing, oh, you can't know about this, you can't know about that, but it's like at what level are you doing it? If you look at, the stuff I just laid out in the 5 keys, for instance, I laid out 3 levels of the qua squat. And the first layer, of course, is just your basic alignments, making sure your knees aren't moving, keeping the spine integrated, folding in the inguinal grooves, this real basic squat. And when you've got that down, then you can move on to the next level and the next level. And then you get deeper into more of the open and closing of the qua. Yes? And yeah, if you tell the student that all of that exists when you first introduce them to the qua, they're trying to do the upper end of that material before they've done the lower end of that material, before their base and their foundation is set in their body. And the biggest problem we have is the fact that people don't understand how much time and effort is required to really solidify something. They do something once or twice, they get an experience, they think they've done that, what's next? This is the modern age, yes? Mm-hmm. So you push a button, you get a result. So they think they do 3 or 4 qua squats, that's it, I've done that, what is next? What do you do now? So this is the issue. It's not knowing what the parameters are, the detail, all of that I think is extremely important. But how much information you give has to be enough to allow the person to be able to practice it accurately and correctly, but at the level they're at now, in the moment. And when you see a few months down the line, they've solidified that and they can do that without even thinking about it. It's embodied. Then you give them the next piece and it goes in and it becomes integrated. But when the student gets the information too quickly, it disintegrates their movement.
So I've been trying to experiment with this lately, and tell me if I'm on track here. I've got one kind of very mixed level Qigong course going right now. And what I end up doing is giving a very general explanation of what we want to do. And then obviously it's in a small group, I can go around and give more experienced people adjustments and, you know, help the beginners just with the basic alignments and all the stuff we're talking about. But what I've found is that when the time that I want to say, you know, there are 3 levels to this, or this the progression goes from this to that, this is happening sort of after the fact. So for some of my more experienced folks, they'll have an experience, they'll try to verbalize it and articulate it after they've experienced it in class. And then we can say, yeah, what you just felt was ba 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 ba. And that's when I've been introducing sort of the tiered information, almost as a look back for people once they've felt it. Right?
Yeah. Because what's happening for them is they're bringing it alive in their body. They're feeling it to some degree. There's a certain level of embodiment. And when you embody one level of the Neigong, the next level starts to show itself automatically. This is what I'm talking about when I say, the secrets. They're not secret because nobody will tell you unless you are the special or the chosen one, yeah? They're secrets because until you go in your body and you actually put it in your body, the next piece will not show itself. It won't come alive inside of you. So this is why it's a secret. You can tell everybody everything, and there's people around and they can talk till the cows come home about all the different stuff within the material, but you ask them to show you something and their practice is really poor. So there's a disconnect here. When the person who's training really trains, and then at some point in their training things start to gel and integrate, the next level of information or the next level of that training starts to present itself, and then they come to you with the question, oh, well, I'm getting this happening in my practice now, and you go, great, now you know that they've actually embodied what you've previously taught them, and that's the precise moment that you drop the next piece in, or you explain the different levels of, because now they're very receptive and their foundation can take it on board.
So let's talk about, I love that. That's awesome. And that there's more I want to say about that. But for people who are trying to figure out how to get into that practice attitude, let's give some sort of red flags in terms of questions you might be asking. Like let me start you off with one that I see all the time, which to me is like a sign that it's not really embodied or integrated yet. People say to me, if we're talking about sort of letting the lower back relax and getting a connection to the legs, somebody will say, oh, well, should I also be wrapping when I do this? Should I do this while I'm doing that when you introduce a new technique? To me, that says, well, you don't have it yet if you're trying to put the pieces together really directly like that. Do you know what I mean?
I do absolutely know what you mean, because they're intellectually projecting, oh, if I do this, will this be involved, or will that happen as well, or should I throw this in, or should I add that in? And unfortunately, the modern marketing style of our societies has led people into this. You're conditioned into it, not just one thing. You don't get one thing anymore.
Yeah.
It's like in America now, it's not just buy a new car, it's buy new cars, one for him and one for her, same car in two different colors, okay? There's always this and. If you buy this product, you get this freebie, and this freebie, yes? So it's about a collection of things that are being thrown in a bundle for you. And so the mind wants to go to this. Well, if I'm doing this, what about this, this, and this? But that's definitely a mental projection. It is not an embodiment, because if it's an embodiment, when they do that, they go, oh, I'm getting this wrapping that's happening as I'm closing, and as I'm dropping the back of my pelvis, sacrum, tailbone, I'm getting this wrapping that's coming in as well, and it seems to be in my thighs as well as my body, and it's like, yeah, that's what will happen when you engage your core correctly. So
two different mental attitudes here. And I want people to, what I'm hoping, I think you frame these problems so well that I hope when people listen to this, what they come away with is not a checklist of stuff they have to do, but a way to reflect on at any given time during their practice, which mental attitude they're falling into.
Okay.
So if you see what I mean.
I think I get you. Let's see if this works. From the perspective of a student, what you need to do is separate out the components of whatever you're learning, whether it's a Tai Chi form, a bagua palm change, Qigong set. You need to separate out the components, because when each component is clean and accurate, and then you integrate those components together, you get high quality Neigong. And therefore, you need to focus in on specifics, and you need to ignore everything else when you're working on that one component. And what do I mean by a component? If we seem to be going around energy gates some way or another here. So sure. If you look at cloud hands, for instance, you have a systematic build. You have the alignments, and then you have a weight shift, you have a turning in the body. And so all of those things need to be built in individually before you even think about your arms, because as soon as you put the arms on and you move from the arms, basically it's going to leave behind the legs and the spine and all the good work downstairs. So you need to really focus on getting your weight shift clean and smooth. And now when you're focusing on that one single component, you will start to notice where your body's stiff, which side of your body is more flexible than the other, which side is easier to receive your weight, which one's more difficult. You'll notice that you can really root better in one leg than the other. You'll notice that certain tissues in one hip or the other hip will be tighter. And therefore, in just doing the weight shift, not only do you notice these things, but as you focus in deeper and you control your movement, you start to release those tensions from your body, and you actually gain the benefit that you're looking for from the exercise. The same with turning. When you start to turn, you start to open up soft tissues in different areas or stretch them in different ways than you would with a weight shift. and you go through the same process. You feel deeper in, you find what's glitchy and what's smooth, and you remove the glitches by being very conscious of making a very smooth and continuous turning. And when these two are pretty much together, you combine them. When they're good, when you can do them smoothly and accurately and you've got rid of some of the glitches, you put them together, and then the two together will increase the stretches, the blood flow, the chi flow, and then you go through the same process again. You start feeling, because when you put the weight shift and the turning together, it gets into parts of your legs and your pelvis and your lower spine that you weren't hitting before. And so as you build these pieces up, you get deeper in and you release tensions and you open up soft tissues and you increase circulation of blood and chi. These are the benefits. These are the reasons why you're doing it. And then you bring the arms in and you learn the arms independently, and then you put it all together, and suddenly your cloud hands is a very different animal. So it's this systematic approach and really focusing and honing in on the one thing you're doing, whether that one thing is a single component or whether that one thing is combining some components together, or whether that one thing is the whole movement.
So when you're going through the I guess this is what I often see for folks, is that when you're going through the individual pieces, you discover some glitches. And you do that with the legs, then you do that with the turning. And when you go to combine, now your list of glitches is twice as long. I know that's not what you just said.
Absolutely. And this is why you don't just, and I give this to every class I teach, I say this in one way or another. At the end of the class, don't just go home and practice what we did at the end.
Yeah.
The finished product. And that's the separate and combine principle.
Yeah.
You practice each component in a separate, then you combine it all together and practice it all together, and do that on a regular basis, daily if you can, if you have the time. Because when you just practice the exercise as a whole, at whatever level you're at now, that's pretty much where you're going to remain. Because there's so many things going on in there. One arm's going up, one arm's going down, one arm's going forward, one arm's going back. The weight shift, the turning, the work with the qua, the tissue stretches, the twisting of the soft tissues, the this, that, and the other that's going on in there. All of those things, the mind cannot cope with dealing with all of that in any given moment. So the mind end up going from one thing to another thing to another thing, and it never really solidifies anything.
Yeah.
So the separation and the recombining allows you to go in and clean up each component. And your computer, your car, your mobile phone is at the level it's at from the engineers doing exactly that process with those units. They look at how something works, they take it to pieces, they find out where the glitches are, they clean up those components, they put it back together, and now it functions better. Yes?
Yeah.
So that's called development.
So
we
let's talk about that. I want to push you on that a little bit more, because you said at the beginning that you did energy gates for 7 years. When I first learned energy gates, I stopped trying to work with the gates at all for about 3 years, because I found myself closing my eyes and then picturing almost like a paint by number model of these dots on my body. So, when I say energy gates, I mean set. Well, right? No. But my point is that I think it's really hard for people to appreciate the time scale for this integration to really happen. And
absolutely.
And I here's what I want to avoid, and I try to avoid this. I don't think it's helpful to anybody, given the context that we live in, to say, well, you're going to be okay at it after 10 years. that may be true from like a 30 or 40 year perspective, but that doesn't help anybody get anywhere on the 10 years. And the territory between 0 and 10 years, every step of the way has all this rich stuff to explore that I think it's a disservice to people to say, well, you're going to suck for a long, I mean, maybe that's just my bias, but knowing how long, I think this is, again, the mismatch between how much information is out there and how long the process actually takes to unfold. Help me reconcile that. I mean, maybe you're just more comfortable telling people, no, shut up, it's going to take 10 years and just go practice.
No, I don't like to do that because that puts people off. They go, 10 years, I'm out of here. You know, that doesn't help anyone. No, I mean, look, this comes under the hat, the term of less is more.
Okay.
If we take this thing with the energy gates, a number of people come up to me and say energy gates, and I say, yes, they exist. Well, I should be dissolving them. Yes, when you can feel them. But before you can feel the energy gates, you really need to dissolve the basic gunk out of your body so that you can really tune into what's there rather than, as you say, draw an image of these pictures with all these points on it. You will get a lot of benefit by doing the real basic foundation material in any of this work. And you'll get more benefit from doing that than you will charging through the material and trying to get to the high end. Now, if you spend your time and you do each layer over the years, when you get 10 years down the line and you are working on those energy gates and you are clearing those gates, you will make a huge jump in the chi work. But until you've done that foundational material, that's wasted effort. So the less is more. Doing something really well, a little something really well, will do more for you than trying to do a lot poorly or a high-end application poorly. So from this perspective, the standing and sinking chi and just letting the mind and the nerves go and letting the energy just drain down through the body with excellent alignments will do more for you than standing there trying to force your mind into your body and find energy gates and release them. That will create a lot of tension in your mind and your body. It won't actually get you anywhere.
Yeah.
And then after some time of doing the sinking chi work, and you can actually really feel and control your downward flow of chi, you can turn it on at will. Now go and dissolve. Now learn the dissolving. And when you can turn the dissolving process on at will, now learn how to find your gates, feel your gates, and release those gates. And I see these 3 levels of being really important. And the alignments themselves is like your first, the ground, because I see people without good alignments trying to dissolve their energy gates, and I don't know how much they get from their practice. They might get some interesting experiences in their head, but their body doesn't really do much, you know?
So when somebody, I mean, again, like I'm fighting this urge to say, oh, if there are 3 levels, I'm really special and I should be doing the highest level because, you know, the going through the bottom level, that's just for other people. That's for suckers who who can't imagine the 3rd level, right? So I'm fighting that tendency. But let's just talk about, because and when I watch this process happen the right way, there's so much at the whatever level somebody's coming into it. You get them aligned for the first time, it feels really, really good. It's not like this sort of like scrubbing the floors and like torture for 10 years until. So what do you see in that sort of on that end?
If people focus on the here and the now, and they're really honest with themselves about where they are, and they practice at the level that they're at, they will get huge benefits from their practice, and their practice will be incredibly enjoyable because they're not overloading their system. They're not reaching for the sky. They're where they're at. And this is always the difficulty from the perspective of the teacher, because the teacher needs to be able to tune into the students and know where that student's at and give them the right parameters, the right information and the right encouragement, and poke them in the right direction. And I would say that's the hardest job we have, is actually realizing where the people are at. Because I see a lot of teachers out there and they just basically teach what's very interesting for them at the moment. That doesn't help people. What helps people is tuning into where they're at, what they need, and basically saying, this is where you're at, this is what you need. If you do this, it's going to pay you dividends. And then when you see them and they've embodied that, and they're obviously ready for the next piece, you can give that to them, whether that's in the next class or whether that's in the next series.
Can you say anything about, as an instructor, how you modulate that for somebody you see 3 times a year versus once a month versus even like once or twice a week? Like how do you read that?
How do I read it?
Well, maybe that's...
I'm not sure how I read it. I mean, I kind of like get a sense where I think somebody's at, and I couldn't say that I get it correct every time, but I get a sense of where someone's at, and I try to be very realistic with people and say, looking at your movements, what's lacking here is this piece. You could learn, you could advance much quicker if you take this one component and really get that alive in your body, because it's really lacking at the moment. So I'm always looking at what is the imbalance in them.
Yeah.
For some people, that will be they're overextending. Some people, they're not putting in enough effort. Others, it's like their weight shift's like 60%. It's like, come on, you can do better than that. I know you can. You have the flexibility, you know. And I try to encourage people to take on board the pieces that's holding them back. Mm-hmm. Because everybody likes to practice what is interesting or what is easy for them. They don't like to practice what's hard. So encouraging and giving people reason why they want to practice that piece that's a bit awkward for them or engages tension in their body that they'd rather not engage. And try to get them to realize that when they engage those stuck parts of their body and they open up and they release that tension, it's going to free up everything in their body and in their movements. I find this works quite well for some.
And, you know, I'm still thinking about people I see 3 days a week or 3 days a week, or a group that
Okay, so yeah, if we're going to look at that, it's like, if you're working with people on a very regular basis,
just keep repeating yourself, right?
Well, to some degree, yeah, you do, but you give them really small bite-sized pieces. Mm-hmm. And you can also give them like, well, do this for 3 days, come back, let's see where you're at.
Yeah.
Or do this for a week. At the minute, I'm in like monthly courses. Mm-hmm. I'm doing quite a few monthly courses in London. And then I do 2-3 seminars a year in other locations. So I hit those longer term things. So the way I design the structure of my course is, especially when I know the people that are coming in, I structure the course to take them through, this is going to be a 3-month training for you. So I present material and I let them know it's going to take you 3 months to get this down, what I'm showing you today. Mm-hmm. And so take this apart over the next 3 months. I'm going to show you what each of the exercises are, and then start at the beginning and focus more on the beginning exercises we do in the seminar at the beginning of this 3-month period and less at the end. And then as you move through the 3 months, you take on board more of the higher end material. So there's like this evolving practice that happens over those 3 months. Then when I see them again, I look at where they are, and then I assess what is needed, and I try and do that same thing again.
I'm thinking about the flip side of the same coin, because every day that any of us gets up to practice, it's just the next day, right? So I'm trying to think about which attitude do you need to adopt in your own daily practice? For you, let me ask you to start into this way. What would be ideal for you in terms of how often would you see your teacher if he was there, versus get just going and practicing and training on your own? Like, what's the right balance people should be thinking about? And I mean this both in terms of external feedback, but also in terms of how often you want to take on something new versus just training and integration time.
Yeah, and this is a really personal thing, and this is a multidimensional model in itself, Dan. Because
it's just us, so you can just tell me if it's really personal.
No, not at all. It's a real thing. Because look, in the beginning, you take a complete beginner, and it takes you all weekend just to get them into like doing a decent cloud hands, yeah, or a half decent cloud hands, let's say. When you've been practicing for a quarter of a century, you only need 2 minutes with your teacher, and he will give you stuff that's going to keep you going for the next half a year or more. Because he's just going to give you one little tweak, and suddenly you've got a lot of work and a lot of integration to do. So the higher you are up in the practices, or the longer you've been doing, the more you've embodied, the less time you actually need with your teacher. But from a beginner's perspective, you want to see your teacher as often as you can, because it's very easy to go off the rails. So you need that ongoing support to make sure you don't go off the rails. Because let's say you're going down this road and you take a diversion of 5 degrees off of that road. 3 months later, you're way off track. Yes?
Yeah.
The longer you've been on that road, the easier it is to stay on that road. And therefore, you don't need to see your teacher as often, because you know what they are, all those pitfalls and all those diversions. Yes? Mm-hmm. You've already kind of worked through the bulk of that.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just reflecting on that. If there was anything else I should say there.
Well, no, this is interesting. So I can't remember whether you and I talked about this directly or not, but I just last spring and summer went through the process of building up to a 2-hour stand.
Uh-huh.
And I did it by just adding a minute a day. And I promised myself that if I encountered any serious internal resistance, I would back off and slow down, and I wouldn't just forge ahead because of the clock. But it turned out that just 1 minute extra each time was a really sustainable pace, and I got there. And what it felt like to me at the time, or why I sort of took it on, was because it felt like that chunk, doing it over 100 days to get to that threshold, felt like a meaningful chunk of practice. Whereas I think earlier on I would have felt like, oh, well, let me just learn this form and then I can get some feedback on the form. Or let me refine one movement. But I'm wondering if this is related to what you're saying in terms of the amount of training and integration that you want to reflect on and get feedback on will also shift over time as you practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to pick up on something you said there, because that practice you did, that is what I would put under the hat of pushing out the envelope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of thing I wouldn't suggest to a beginner, because two things. One, that even though it was such a small increment, your system could take it because of the years of practice you'd already done before it. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Yeah.
And that pushed you out to that really opened up your envelope. And that's excellent, because now it means that your capacity, your stamina has grown. And now you can use that new space, that time space that you can practice for. You can put that into other practices now. Yes. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. With beginners, I go the other way. I say, don't do more than 10 minutes at any one time if you're going to do a real focused practice. Because when you try and push yourself too early, then you build up that internal resistance you were discussing.
Yeah.
you know what internal resistance feels like because you've come across it before. Therefore, you can navigate around it and you can see the signs of it coming on. So, it's a bit much if I push today, and so I'll relax. Yes?
Yeah.
I'll do less today, and then when you feel better, I can do more today. Yes?
Yeah.
And that's fine. But in the beginning, I think that is a failure strategy for a beginner.
Yeah.
But for
Absolutely.
for a long-term practitioner who is looking to really go somewhere with the material, they're going to have to do that at some point in their reality, whether it's with standing or whatever that practice is.
Yeah, in fact,
You know?
I use the trick that you mentioned about the beginners. I needed the same trick for motivation. When I decided how long to stand for at first, I dialed back the amount of time well below what I felt like was my current threshold.
Excellent.
And I used that to get going, because I would set the timer and go, and it would say stop at 23 minutes, and I would say, oh man, come on, I could stand for another 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Like, let me, for the first several weeks, if not longer, I finished every day feeling like, man, I really could have done more. I can't wait for tomorrow to, do it again and take another crack at it.
That is what you're after in your practice. Absolutely. 100%. And this comes under the rule of thirds and whatever your ceiling is. Now, the rule of thirds states that if you're a healthy individual, then you practice to 2/3 of your capacity. So you always leave this 1/3 reserve. And that 1/3 reserve, and that's in like how much you stretch out, how long you practice, the intensity you practice with. Mm-hmm. When you keep that 1/3 in reserve, you never feel like you pushed your system. And because you never pushed your system, your nervous system releases. And this is critical because this is a mind-body practice, or mind-body chi practice. Mm-hmm. And in any mind-body chi practice, if you push your system, the body doesn't trust the mind, and you strain your nerves and your chi, and you actually bring that ceiling down. And what do I mean by the ceiling? It's like, the glass ceiling stops you from advancing, yes? Mm-hmm. And if that ceiling comes down, it means your capacity and your ability to practice reduces. Now, if you don't push your system, that ceiling will rise naturally at the 2/3 limit, because 2/3 means you're not being lazy, you're exercising regularly, you're generating blood chi development, yes? Mm-hmm. And your body's opening up, and as your body naturally opens up, then your ceiling naturally rises. So your 2/3 may be a lot less than other people are doing in the moment, but after a couple of years, your 2/3 has risen because your capacity has risen, your ceiling has risen. And if the nerves are strained, you pull that ceiling down onto you and you lock it into place, and then you cannot progress.
It's really interesting. I mean, I used to...
Now, hold on a second.
Yeah,
Dan,
please, go ahead.
That's for healthy individuals. Right. But now, if you talk about someone who's compromised, somebody that has had a serious illness or accident or injury or whatever, or they have some genetic disorder or whatever, autoimmune disease, I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities. Now you only practice to 1/3. You flip it. You practice to 1/3 of your ability and you leave a 2/3 reserve, because now your system's not up and it's not running smoothly. So you've got to encourage your system to really let go and release. Yes? Yeah. And when you do the 1/3, it's called lazy efficiency. I mean, circling hands is great for this, because it's, if you look at wax in your car, mm-hmm. It's not how hard you push that wax onto your car, it's how many circles you make with the cloth that really buffs up that and brings the shine to the paintwork. And when you're doing circling hands, it's a really gentle practice, and so it goes into the body and it releases the nerves and it lets the tissues drop open. And that 1/3, that lazy efficiency, allows you to recover And then over a period of time, you build up to your 2/3.
Interesting.
And so from a compromised situation, you start with 1/3, you have a 2/3 reserve. If you're healthy, you use 2/3 of your capacity, you have a 1/3 reserve. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you're somewhere in the middle. And then you design your program, the effort, the time, and how much you open up your system during any practice session, so that you do not tighten the nerves, strain the chi, push the body. And that's when you develop.
Huh. You know, I think I'm used to thinking of the rule of thirds as saying, you know, you're going to be really bad at telling where that 100% is, and you're not going to judge, you know, where the strain point is. So stay well away from it. Stay down here at 70%. But what I just heard you say was really the opposite. It was, if you train with that 1/3 reserve, you're actually looking to trigger further release of the nerves.
Absolutely.
And trigger the integration process that's going to happen by staying away from that strain point. So I used to think of it as like cautionary, but now you've got me thinking about it as to really get a follow-on effect in your training.
It actually increases the speed of your progression when you nail it. And I mean, you've got to put that rule of thirds to everything. Every turn you do, every close, every open, every tissue stretch, every spinal bow, every standing practice, the effort you put in trying to dissolve those energy gates, the whole kit and caboodle.
Interesting.
And that's why you need to separate everything out. Because when you separate everything out and you grab that one component, then you work out what that component is at 2/3 of your capacity. If you're healthy, 1/3 if you're compromised, and you let the body release and drop open. Now, of course, you've got like the yin and the yang within the arts, like your Tai Chi and your bagua. So your Tai Chi is well within your 2/3, and your bagua, it takes it that little bit above, yes? But that's just because of its yang methodology. But then again, you wouldn't train bagua if you were unhealthy, compromised. That wouldn't do you. That would exhaust you, you know? So when you're healthy, when you're fit, when you're strong, then you go more into your bagua practice. And when you're weak, when you're compromised, you go more into the Tai Chi practice. And then you can oscillate between those two, and you can find what your body needs on a daily basis.
Interesting. But no, I just want to circle this back to where we started. Like, it's so tempting to then be comfortable and happy and sit with the mental model that sort of explains everything this way. So that's what I'm going to take away from this talk too, is like, I'm going to keep struggling with bouncing back and forth between feeling into that thirds, feeling into the 70% versus, I don't know. Sorry, I'm just finishing this with more questions, I think. But yeah, I think that is going to be the challenge.
I mean, something I just picked up there. I mean, that kind of information that we were just discussing, like the rule of thirds and the glass ceiling and releasing the nerves. I mean, I don't see that as the information the student shouldn't get for a while. I think that's exactly what they need in the beginning to understand how to pick their way through their training. I'm talking about the technical information on, oh, well, now you can do this. Now you start spiraling your whatever, or you start doing all sorts of crazy advanced stuff. That's
that's
reverse breathing, whatever it is that people want to get down to, those nuggets that they've heard of that they want to get to. Yes?
Yeah.
If you want to get to those juicy bits, it's the rule of thirds, it's the separate and combine, it's the sensible training, it's the being realistic with yourself, being honest with yourself where you're at, and if you really don't know, ask your teacher. They'll tell you where you're at and what you need to do. That's what they're there for. They're there to guide you and help you to advance and reach your potential.
That makes a lot more sense. It's this sort of distinction of the information versus the training methodology. And you're going to hate me for this, but just I'm going to plug you anyway. But Paul's written a lot about this on his website. And tell me if this is true. You have, in terms of that framework for training, that's something you send out to people if they sign up for your email list?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So wherever you are in your practice, if you want to sort of check your own framework for training, that's definitely reach out to Paul, get on his email list. You'll get some great information about that. So,
yeah.
Okay. Well, I think you're making me feel a little bit better than when we started.
Oh, that's a positive then.
That's why we're doing this, right?
Hopefully.
Is there anything else, just thinking about this subject, kind of big picture, that you think it's helpful for people to know in terms of their own training or working with teachers, or anything for teachers that you'd say?
Yeah, I think the teachers really need to start looking at their students and realistically analyzing what their students need in the here and now. And the students really need to look at where they're at and train at the level they're at. And it's fine to, learn all these interesting things, or learn about all this interesting stuff, read about it, and watch whatever videos are available, read whatever books are available, go on whatever courses are available. But your progression is always limited by your foundation. And this is why the material's always circular. Every time I've gone up a notch in my training, it's because I've gone back to the beginning, gone through all of the beginning material again, and just check and find out what needs refining, what needs fixing, what needs honing, and then take the step to the next level. And then that starts to fix more solid in my practice. And then again, stay there for a while. Yes. So you have climbs and plateaus. Mm-hmm. So you climb to a certain point, what you can take on board. And then you have this plateau, and for a while you're practicing that. You're trying to get it online. You're embodying it. You're playing with it. You're taking it apart again and again, rebuilding it. And you just keep playing with that for a period of time until you feel that, you've done what you can do with that. Then don't think about going to the next level. Go back to the beginning. Go back to the foundation material. Run through your foundation material again, come back up to that level that you're at, that plateau you were working at, and then take the next step up the ladder. And then you plateau again, and you work that. And when that gets solidified and embodied to some degree to whatever you can do, then come all the way back to the beginning again and go through that process.
All right.
Because every step you go up the ladder, when you go back to the beginning, you find material that you haven't actually solidified at the base level. And this is why you should look at it as a pyramid rather than a ladder. Because that pyramid, the base of that pyramid, is really wide and really deep to get the apex to reach the sky. And that's a lot of material on the base level.
Interesting. I like that model a lot. Great. Well, thank you so much, Paul. It's always, I find it super interesting and super helpful to hear your thoughts on this stuff. It's hard to get this kind of information, so really appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll continue this conversation sometime in the future.
Yeah, I like your angle as well, Dan, because you make me go into corners and little pockets that I wouldn't necessarily go from this to this, you know. So you help me also to unwind stuff that I've got in here somewhere I've absorbed at some point in time.
Right on, right on. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.